Mr Chair.
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Chair, look, I thought I'd just take a short call and just correct a few things. I think it's important to remember that this bill is actually seeking to increase the youth services which currently are focused on 16 and 17-year-olds to take into to be able to work with 18 and 19-year-olds. So we haven't got a whole lot of people with families. These are mainly young 18, 19-year-old New Zealanders without children who are deemed to be at significant risk of long-term welfare dependency. That's the purpose of this bill, and how we got onto sleeping in cars and children, etc., is another wonder of the opposition. But however, I think it's important when we're talking about numbers of young people to get our facts right, so that it's actually 82,000, I think, that the latest household labour force survey talked about, in that range from 15 to 24, who are described as neat. Now that actually describes that, and that has increased. I admit that, accept that, but that actually describes what people are not doing. It doesn't describe what they are doing. And of course we know in that age group people are doing a whole lot of things. They might be on a gap year, they could be travelling, they could be living with their parents quite happily, they could have a partner who is supporting them. For whatever reason, they are not in employment, not in education, and not in training. More importantly, we should be focusing on the number of young people in that age group who are on a benefit, and that those numbers are dropping, and that is as a result of greater economic activity, the growth in jobs, and in some part we are working with the youth service to enable young people to get the education skills that they need, and by extending it through to 18 and 19-year-olds to help them develop some of those employable skills and go on into employment. So, it's really important that we don't confuse many, many thousands of young people who are perfectly capable of looking after themselves and are doing so. They just don't happen to be in education, employment or training. And focus on those that are reliant on a benefit in order to survive. So that's the first point. In actual fact, we are seeing the lowest number of what we describe as, from an education point of view, as NEETs, that is those 15 and 16-year-olds. We're seeing the lowest number of those that we have seen in decades. And it's really important that we understand what is going on. They are staying at school longer, actually. They are staying in school longer. And the youth services are picking up those that are falling out of the school system or are at risk of falling out of the school system, developing the relationship. It is all about relationships. So the conversation, the member talking about a telephone call laying all this out was just stupid, because no one would form a relationship with a young person who has a very difficult life anyway in that form, and I'm sure none of our providers are doing that. The other thing that was mentioned was the consequences of sanctions. I ask you to think about what are the consequences of saying to a young person, we want you, if you are receiving the support from the taxpayer because at a time in your life when you need it, we want you, if you're a young parent, we want you to have your child enrolled with a GP, we want you to have your immunisation up to date, we want your child either in early childhood education, which we provide 20 hours, the taxpayer subsidises, or we want you to be sure that your young child is attending school. Now, they are not difficult obligations to ask of someone that the taxpayer is supporting. And you have to have a process of consequence if people are taking on the one hand, but not keeping up with their obligations on the other. However, I have to say the process that our providers go through have sanctions as a very last resort, for the very reasons that the member who resumed her seat before me outlined, that without the benefit, they have no way to support themselves. So it has to be an absolute last resort. And in fact, the providers that I've talked to do everything in their power to ensure that they keep those young people compliant. Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
And then finally, I just want to make the point that when we announced this policy, one of the supporters for it was Dr. Lance O'Sullivan. And I remember the comments that he had to make. He was New Zealander of the Year. And one of the comments that he made was the children of some of these young parents, because of their youth, because of their inexperience, their children are probably ones who would benefit the most from early childhood, a time in early childhood centres. They are the ones who would benefit from social development, cognitive development and emotional development that high quality early childhood services provide. So the evidence is very clear to back this sort of policy. The other thing I'd say in closing is I think that the opposition are making a reasonable point that this is a fairly new policy and it is still in the process of being evaluated and it will be some time. I'm as frustrated as anyone else that we don't have better evaluation earlier. But this is a long process with these young people and we are constantly adjusting with the providers the ways of addressing and developing those relationships. But these young people are worth that investment over a long period of time. We know that evidence tells us that you can't go in once, do a job and then walk away. It's not, these aren't the young people that you can leave to try and support themselves. They are going to need a lot of support over a long period of time and the evaluation, the full evaluation could take 4 to 5 years. Before we get a really good picture, and I'm probably even cutting it short from the research scientists who would like to see it out over a longer period of time. But we do know from the providers and from the young people that both in the young parents and some of those 16 and 17-year-olds currently in the service, that to have an artificial line of age when they are receiving good support and they are starting to succeed is a stupid thing to do, and we shouldn't cut them off from that support when they need it.
I call Lewis Award.